Dune has finally made it back onto the big screen after years of struggle and development hell. Are they finally doing it and doing it and doing it well? Well, let's find out. Here's my review. Dune is based on the 1965 sci-fi novel by Frank Herbert, the first in a series of Dune books which make up the Duneverse, a term I cannot and will not take credit for. Herbert wrote 6 novels. Then, after he passed away, his son Brian Herbert and author Kevin James Anderson took over the series in 1999, and it continues to this day. It's a hugely influential book where you can see its fingerprints in a lot of your favorite sci-fi properties: Star Wars, Star Trek, Tremors, Beetlejuice, any of Vin Diesel's non-Fast and Furious movies. The original Dune novel is a dense, sprawling sci-fi epic. The simple explanation is, it's the year 10,191, which is very refreshing because most sci-fi properties thought the year 2000 was far enough away for flying cars and shit. It wasn't. There's a shadowy emperor who assigns different factions of societies to control different sectors of the universe. One of these factions is House Atreides, and they're tasked with controlling Arrakis, also known as Dune, a desert planet that holds melange, street name spice. It's a drug that gives you extended life, expanded mental capacity, and a free glowing blue eyes filter. #Beach Day! It's basically a big pharmaceutical racket, and House Atreides are the drug dealers. But the catch is, the planet is nearly uninhabitable. The locals are pissed that people keep stealing their supply. A rival house, House Harkonnen, are plotting revenge after being replaced in the spice trade. And also, there are giant butthole worms everywhere. Paul Atreides is the son of the Duke of House Atreides, and he also happens to be the chosen one of the prophecy of a religious-ish group of women who are... God damn it. You can see how the plot could just get away from you, right? This is the simple explanation. Why don't we just stick with, he who controls the spice controls the universe. Now, creating a successful Dune movie adaptation is a lot like mining spice. People keep trying to harvest it for its intoxicating properties, but it's nearly impossible. Many have tried and failed.
They tried and failed?
They tried and died.
There was an attempt in 1971, failed. There was the failed 1974 attempt by Jodorowsky, which is detailed in the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune. And it's the word that's been thrown around for a lot of movies recently, but it is truly bonkers. His Dune would have been a 10-hour cacophony of insanity. If you haven't seen that documentary, you should watch it just for what could have been. In 1976, Dino De Laurentiis acquired the rights, and Ridley Scott was attached for 7 months. But then he left because it just got too big and unwieldy. It wasn't until Dino hired my man, David Lynch, that Dune finally became a feature film. And it was hyped up as a massive event. I remember seeing it as a kid because it was supposed to be the next Star Wars. I definitely shouldn't have seen this as a 5-year-old. It has some very disturbing Lynch moments.
You are so beautiful, my Baron.
And that might explain a lot about who I am and what I've become, but you can clearly see on screen what Lynch found interesting about Dune and what he didn't. And I'll get to that in a second. But it is incredibly obtuse, inaccessible. The majority of the dialogue might as well be a foreign language without subtitles. And large chunks of it feel like they just crammed 10 chapters into 3 minutes of screen time. So what was supposed to be a massive success turned into a box office bomb. Critics hated it, and there was a sense of a missed opportunity.
Now, this is kind of amazing. Out of a couple hundred films that Roger and I each saw this year, we agree that the biggest disappointment of the year is Dune, with a huge budget, a talented young director, and a script based on a highly regarded science fiction novel. I've had more fun with sand at the beach.
They had the greatest sci-fi novel of all time in their hands. It could have been the next Star Wars. How could they mess this up? Well, Lynch didn't have final cut, but even if he did, producer Rafaela De Laurentiis says it wouldn't have mattered. Lynch's cut was almost 4 hours long and wouldn't have cleared anything up. The movie was just too confusing. But Frank Herbert himself was happy with it, saying, "They've got it. It begins as Dune does. What reached the screen is a visual feast, and I hear my dialogue all the way through. There are some interpretations and liberties, but you're gonna come out knowing you've seen Dune. However, no one else agreed, including Lynch. He was actually halfway through the script for the sequel, but everything got shut down and canceled. He actually disowned the film, and he said in his book, "I always knew Dino had final cut on Dune, and because of that, I started selling out before we even started shooting. It was pathetic is what it was, but it was the only way I could survive because I signed a fucking contract. If it would have been a success, I would have been Mr. Dune. I was sick, just sick, and devastated after Dune. Tried and died." After the failure of 84's Dune, it took 16 years for the next version to be made, this time a sci-fi miniseries in 2000. It was fairly well received, but also felt like it wasn't living up to its full potential just because of the budget constraints. After that, there was a failed attempt by Peter Berg in 2008. I can't even imagine what that would have been. A failed 2010 Pierre Morel attempt. And then in 2016, Legendary acquired the rights and signed Denis Villenueve to direct. Which leads us to our third screen version of Dune. And just for context, I did a double feature of Lynch's Dune, followed by Villeneuve's Dune, and it's impossible not to compare the two. Their major beats are nearly identical and only really diverge in the last half hour, which is the part that Lynch clearly wasn't interested in exploring. And the similarities obviously make sense since they're based off the same book, but even the execution is identical in certain scenes. The pain box, the assassination attempt, the poison tooth, the anti-gravity villain. The exception is Lynch's version is incredibly dense and impenetrable.
We have just folded space from X.
Yes? How was your journey?
Many machines on X. New machines.
Oh? Yes?
Better than those on Riches. You are transparent.
I have ordered House Atreides to occupy Arrakis to mine the spice, thus replacing their enemies, the Harkonnens. House Atreides will not refuse because of the tremendous power they think they will gain. Then, at an appointed time, Baron Harkonnen will return to Arrakis and launch a sneak attack on House Atreides. I have promised the Baron 5 legions of my...
You just have to let the dialogue wash over you because there's no way you can understand it on the first viewing, second viewing, maybe even third or fourth. In fact, I'll never forget hearing about how they had to hand out these little cards to the audience with definitions from Dune for them to understand what the fuck was happening. But ignore the dialogue, don't try to keep up, and you'll be rewarded with some really inventive, messed up Lynchian moments. A blobby space alien in a tea kettle, a bizarre aside involving milking a cat, Minecraft battles, very gross spitting, hilarious worm surfing, lots of dream sequences, and best of all, an extra spicy Sting. Damn, Sting got fit for this movie. Unfortunately, you'll also be punished with drab colors, convoluted narration, and shifting internal monologues, outdated action, and a second half that somehow feels both rushed and entirely too long. And so, we come to the course-correcting Dune of 2021. With more money and more technology at his disposal, Villeneuve should be able to deliver the Dune everyone's always wanted. His batting average is pretty high. Prisoners, Sicario, Arrival, all great movies, and Blade Runner 2049 is one of my favorite movies of the past 5 years. I'll put that on in the background while I work because I just love its meditative, slow burn approach. You see Blade Runner, and it makes all the sense in the world why Villeneuve would want to tackle Dune. Great. This version stars Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto Atreides. He's a kick-ass duke, ruler of the House Atreides, which has been assigned to replace House Harkonnen as the rulers of the planet Arrakis. We're also introduced to Paul Atreides, son of the Duke, played by Timothee Chalamet, and he's a cute little guy who wants to be a part of the action, but his dad needs him to stay safe in case anything ever happens to him. We've also got Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck, the weapons master. He was played by Captain Picard in the 84 version. Paul spends a lot of time with his mother, played by Rebecca Ferguson. She's a part of the Bene Gesserit, a group of women who are responsible for the prophecy, and she's trying to prepare Paul to fulfill his destiny. She even teaches him how to use his voice in a weird way to control people's minds. And it's difficult not to talk about this movie without getting bogged down in exposition, because the truth is, it's practically all exposition. David Lynch handled a lot of that by having Virginia Madsen stare at the audience for 5 minutes and give them a Dune history lesson. Here the exposition is handled a little bit more elegantly, mostly by streamlining it or spelling it out more clearly with plain language, or having a character off to the side kind of explain what something means. But there are very few emotional stakes. It's mostly political maneuvering. Everyone moves to Arrakis to take over the spice mining, including Paul's buddy, Duncan Idaho, who already has birthed 1,000 memes due to his absurd name. He's played by Jason Momoa in a role that requires him to really stretch as an actor. Momoa plays a badass warrior who seems like he's always a second away from giving you a wedgie.
Hey, you. Put on some muscle?
I did?
No.
So, totally unlike any other character he's ever played. Idaho embeds himself with the Freemen, the native people of Arrakis, to learn more about their culture. See, the Duke wants to treat the people of Arrakis with respect, unlike the Harkonnens. He knows coexistence will work a lot better than resistance. And does any of this sound interesting to you, or are you glancing over at the related videos section over here? Because this very well may determine whether you'll like this movie, if any of this sounds interesting to you. Well, it does start to get interesting, and the moment that happens is when an assassin attempts to take out Paul, and a traitor turns off their defenses and captures Duke. And then, as it turns out, the Emperor was either afraid or jealous of the Atreides, Paul in particular, and this entire Arrakis job was a swerve to end House Atreides once and for all. That leads to a massive battle between the Harkonnen and the on-their-heels Atreides. Paul and his mother escape to the desert and hook up with the Freemen, and Duke is sent to the Baron Harkonnen, a Marlon Brando parade float played by Stellan Skarsgård. And that's easily the high point of the movie, but there's another half hour or so needed to set up the pieces for Dune Part 2. When the movie ends, we finally meet Zendaya, and she basically looks right into the camera and says,
"This is only the beginning."
But you can't say that after I've already sat through 2 hours and 40 minutes. What did I just watch if now is just the beginning? Why didn't I show up now? I can't do much of anything for 2 hours and 40 minutes straight, let alone start something after 2 hours and 40 minutes. We're in too deep already, Zendaya.
A beginning is a very delicate time.
There's some twists and turns I'm not going to spoil, but the movie does feel huge, and it's a lot easier to follow than Lynch's version. It also has way more action. The battle in the second half is worth the price of admission alone. I don't know if I've ever seen special effects as perfectly rendered as they are in Dune. Just seamless and gorgeous. And yes, the worms look like the holes in butts. Also gorgeous. But it's also very solemn and suffers from sameness throughout. The color palette, the performances, the lack of weird-ass flourishes Lynch was known for. Oscar Isaac, Josh Brolin, Timothee Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, they're all carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders and sometimes feel like they're trudging along to a funeral dirge. These are all archetypes without emotional depth or layers. Only Jason Momoa and Javiar Bardem seem to bring any life to the proceedings. Momoa gets to spout absurd lines like, "They fight like demons. I have never come so close to dying." And Bardem gets to spit dramatically. It's all political intrigue, no humor. It's the Phantom Menace without Jar Jar. And I know you're saying, what? The Phantom Menace without Jar Jar? That would have been way better. That sounds incredible. And yes, at times, it is incredible. There are engaging sections. But just like the Phantom Menace, it can be a chore to get through. And you would think they would learn the lessons from the David Lynch version, but I was actually shocked at how similar a lot of the beats were. Which means they must have determined the issue with Dune 84 wasn't the story, even though Rafaela de Laurentiis would disagree. She said the biggest mistake they made was trying to be too faithful to the book. We felt like, my god, it's Dune. How can we fuck around with it? But a movie is different from a book, and you have to understand that from the start. In some ways, it's missing the experimentation of Lynch. Compare the two pain box scenes. The pain box was a test from the Bene Gesserit to kind of gauge where Paul Atreides was in his prophecy. The new one is just Chalamet's adorable little hand in a box and all theater of the mind as to what's happening. Lynch makes you understand the type of pain Paul is going through and experience it with him by showing you what Paul thinks is happening. It connects you more viscerally to the scene. In the sections where Lynch was engaged, it's more inventive than Villeneuve's direct, sometimes sterile dealings. That approach can be helpful to streamline the story, but there's nothing as organic and flat out weird as shit as the Guild Navigator. Look, I think we're all just trying our best to like Dune. I don't want to not like Dune, but they don't make it easy. It's a lot of work, a lot of space politics, a lot of hard to pronounce words and names like Padishah, Emperor Shaddam Carino, that's one name, Kwisatz Haderach, and Mentat Thufor Hawat. I've got my hands full following American politics and not losing my mind. Now I have to worry about the Harkonnens and the Bene Tleilax, and why is this guy spitting, and what are these women getting their prophecies from? Any sci-fi or fantasy property is going to have a certain veil you have to pierce in order to get on board. That's okay. The best ones can do it by presenting the audience with a surrogate they can relate to or form an emotional bond with. Star Trek has Captain Kirk, Lord of the Rings has Frodo and Sam, Star Wars has Luke, Alien has Ripley, Pluto Nash had Pluto Nash. Dune has Paul Atreides, and he's a bit of a cipher. You don't know much about him. He's told he's the chosen one, then he basically believes it. His journey doesn't start with him having to learn too much. He's educated, well-trained with a weapon. He almost has the mind control voice down. He isn't rejecting his call to action. I actually related more to Oscar Isaac, who brings more gravitas and empathy to his character, caring not just for his son, but also for the people of Arrakis. Paul is too far along on his journey and gets there too easily for us to feel like we're a part of it. Honestly, this perverse need to get it right may suggest there is no way to get it right when it comes to a film version of Dune. I understand you want to stay faithful to the text, and this type of complex world building can be immersive if you can find your way into it. You may feel that way about Dune. If you're open to understanding the complexities of the world they've built, you will love this movie. And as someone who loves Blade Runner 2049 and has had numerous discussions with people who tell me it's boring and slow, I want to love this movie too. But I'm struggling to connect with Dune the same way I connect with Blade Runner. If you do, that's great. I am jealous of you. I am the Emperor Shaddam Carino to your Duke Atreides. And maybe by the time part 2 comes out, I'll have watched this a couple times and appreciate the positives. The big-ass hole worms. Cool lines like, fear is the mind killer. Complicated interstellar politics. This guy's tiny umbrella. Batista! Maybe I'll feel something more for the characters and their story if I see it. What am I talking about? See what I mean? About trying to like Dune? There is something there. There's something there. I just can't seem to grab it. Is there something about it? Let me know what you guys think. Have you seen it? Are you riding high on spice and worm surfing? Or does Dune suck sand?